Okay, so I wanted to make this video because there are a series of questions that have been coming up in my comments online. You didn't even vote. Why the fuck do you care what Trump does? Or if you voted, you should have voted. You don't have a voice if you don't vote. Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? This video is going to be my response to everything that those questions assert. We're 6 months into a Trump presidency. As of yesterday, as far as my time, the House has just passed the big, beautiful bill. This is fucked up. It's scary. It's scary because it involves cuts to Medicaid. It involves 10.9 to 17 million Americans could lose their health coverage over the next decade from Medicaid and ACA cutbacks. New work requirements for Medicaid and SNAP aim at able-bodied adults, entailing digital check-ins, audits, potential benefit suspensions for minor infractions. The bill authorizes $170 billion plus in enhanced funding for ICE, Border Patrol, border wall construction, detention centers, creating the capacity for mass detentions and policing for even more mass detentions and policing of immigrant communities. And all of these points are important to make because ICE is going to be the largest law enforcement entity in the country. They're going to have more resources. According to the Supreme Court, the Trump administration is allowed to pass things that can't be challenged by smaller courts. So we're seeing the carceral infrastructure of the state increase. So we see the authoritarianism, the fascism, the ethnostatism of the United States rising. And it's important to understand that all of this takes due diligence, infrastructure, funding, a lot of ignorance, and a lot of white supremacist imagining. And we're living in the fever dream of all of this stuff. And I think when we're living in the fever dream of capitalism, imperialism, Americanism, etc., we get so caught up in the narrative the state offers us about what progress or winning or what a gain is, that I think sometimes we forget to recalculate the equation for ourselves. And this is what I felt a lot in the 2020 presidential election. I can zoom back and think about 2016, when Trump ran the first time and Bernie was running and a bunch of other people. And I remember I was living in Seattle. So many people felt like Bernie was this great big hope. But for me, it was usually the liberals and the white progressives around me. And that isn't to say that I don't know what the fuck I think about Bernie now. I just know back then, I just thought it was weird how they needed to memify him, how it was so cute, and oh my God, socialism is so cute, and let's just vote him in because it'll get better. And this isn't an indictment of progressive politicians getting into office to make changes that make autonomy, a quality of life, all those things more possible. But there is always the question of, is social change tied to a politician? Is it based in reform, which is simply trying to restructure the processes? In 2016, I found myself being cynical of a white dream of progress that didn't involve collective work, collective questioning, beyond a certain point of militancy. If Kamala lost and Trump won, does that mean we've lost? And furthermore, what are we to do in the situation that we're facing right now? So first, I think it's important to talk about the desire to return to a normal or a previous America. This is tied to American exceptionalism, in my opinion. The idea that Trump is a deviation from the normative modes of action that America takes, the US takes, I think is a falsehood. Yes, we can say that there are many checks and balances being pushed against. Yes, we can say that the infrastructure of the US is being rearranged to give the executive branch more power. But we can't deny the reality. And this is James Baldwin quote: "The liberal's deepest desire is to be delivered from the consequences of what he fears most, the loss of his innocence."
But I know the difference between being black and white and at this time. It means that I cannot fool myself about some things, but I can fool myself about if I'm a white.
But more white people read your novels, I believe, than black people.
Well, black people may not read them, but they steal them. And they sell them, they're hot in bars.
You do spend a long time between novels. Why is that?
Well, I'm that kind of writer. There's no answer to that. You know, some people write, I wish I was George Simenon. People write them in 2 weeks, but I can't. And everybody works the way he can work. I must point out, though, too, that I've been working in the last few years between assassinations. That doesn't make it any easier either. I mean, they're killing my friends. It's as simple as that. And I've been all the years that I've been alive. For no reasons which have any validity.
Why don't you just want to get away somewhere and sit down and write your books? Why don't you want to do that?
Because I'm better than that.
But you don't have to be better than that.
Oh, I do.
So you don't agree then? I mean, when people say, oh, it's okay for him, he's escaped.
What have I escaped? Where, anyway, would I go to escape? To your country? Would I get a political asylum here? Where would a fleeing black man go?
And if we look at Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0 as a metaphorical test for whiteness, for liberalism, for progressivism, we can see how that test has worked. We can see that it has caused liberals and people that are centered to use lip service against white supremacy, against fascism, against authoritarianism. We see that they're trying to lean on the same checks and balances that they have utilized in the past to take less extreme action to save the earth, to save the economy, to save middle-class folks, poor folks, undocumented folks, people from other countries that are being targeted by carceral state violence. I view the challenge of Trump as the chickens coming home to roost. The disinformation and the lack of education and their lack of reading comprehension in the US leading to people being misinformed and populism being wielded against them. And this desire by the other side to scrub away racism quickly, to want to post-racial America, to lean into identity politics as a means of projecting a certain kind of equality, there is a failure there because liberalism and progressivism as it stands in the US does not have the teeth that more militant movements have the capacity to enact in public. Questioning the role of militancy and political violence in this moment is going to be necessary to figure out who can protect who as things get worse and worse. It doesn't mean that the left is lost. I really ask people to look at the conditions and the repression and the obstacles that we've been facing over the last 10 to 20 years, the radical militant left. Can you think about the challenges? Can you name or give yourself a timeline of the different levels of repression against different movements and how it's affected people materially? For me, if you can't name that, specify it, talk about it, give it context, we aren't having a conversation about the relationship between social unrest and state repression. If we believe that the left can only win if we experience no repression at all, or that repression doesn't affect us, I don't believe that that's a reasonable way of looking at the path moving forward. What I believe is that repression is here. It has taken chunks out of our movements. People have died. I really beg people to ask each other, ask themselves, are you anti-American? Are you anti-Trump? Or are you anti-imperialism? If you're anti-America, you might still be into statehood and nationalism. And there's all kinds of conversations and questions around the role of nationalism and statehood, states. If you're anti-Trump, I think you're anti this version of America. You're kind of like, we're fine. Like, what's the big deal? Let's bring back gay marriage. Let's bring it back. And of course, people deserve civil rights, equality, due process, etc. But do we deserve it on the backs of everything that the US has done internationally, globally? Think of the imperial boomerang. If we throw it out, when does it come back and hit us? And in what fashion? Can we control the fashion in which it comes back and hits us? Are we victims of Americanism or are we byproducts of it? Next is the idea or the statement that the left is losing against Trump. One, I really question what is the American left? This came up during the election when I was posting a lot of videos about the election, and I was really questioning, like, what is left? And if I think of the American left, I think it starts with progressivism over here, kind of near the center, like maybe a progressive liberalism, and then we lean more into like socialism, democratic socialism, all of the different socialist tendencies. And then you go further, and then you go into like anarchism, different forms of anarchism, militant direct action, and then further left, I think is like where you go to like primitive anarchism. When I was reading Blood in My Eye by George Jackson, he kept saying like the new left, the old left, the new left, the old left. And I wonder if we were to analyze American society as it is now, how would we describe what could be known as the old left and the new left? Under Trump, I argue that the new left is willing to use militant direct action to push all of the systems and checks and balances as they stand within US government to bend to the will of the people. Old left, I think, wants to reconfigure the systems that are at play to make them more ideal for progressive or socially equitable outcomes. The differences between those things are vast. It's not to say that they don't have some common goals, but the discrepancy there is a willingness or lack thereof to participate in certain state-sanctioned processes of politics and or a willingness to engage with law enforcement, to engage with police, to engage with the state as a means of having a viable conversation about change. Whether or not you think the oppressor can have a conversation with you about changing things and where that shows up when it's useful, I think it's a big question. I think about MLK, I think about the Civil Rights Act, I think about all the legislation that was put in place and fought and won for by the Civil Rights Movement, and how even after these major wins, MLK turned towards Vietnam, MLK turned towards the imperialism that we're enacting in other countries, would be saying things like Muhammad Ali or Malcolm X, like, why are we fighting these people over here when our government's fighting us? What does it mean to lose? What does it mean to lose? If the left is losing to Trump, what does it mean to lose? And I think the more honest and real part of me is saying, yes, there are material losses that we're experiencing. All of these are horror shows of what the US is capable of. And all of these are things that we have enacted in other parts of the world through militaristic intervention and coups and supporting terrorism as a government ourselves. What does it mean to lose? I think it means that the state gains more resources and creates the conditions for us to be even more subjugated than we already are. We lose when we don't have the capacity to have honest conversations with each other, to turn against the mainstream media and the populism. And so the question of losing, are we losing? Is the left losing? We're losing elections. There have been a lot of losses. There's been a lot of repression. Movements have been targeted by RICO charges, trumped-up charges. Now the Trump administration is trying to seek to remove citizenship from naturalized citizens. I can't imagine what that will mean for all different kinds of immigrant activists. There are major playing fields that we have been pushed back on. But I also will say this. In the 60s and 70s, when people were facing COINTELPRO and the war on drugs came about, people had ideas of the conditions being put up against them. People had ideas about the repression and the efforts to sow division within movements that was happening by the state. There were inklings. And people took radical action and used journalism and media to figure out more of the truth of what the state apparatus was doing. I believe we're in a similar time of repression, of surveillance, of the state using as many of its resources to quail dissent. In a lot of ways, I think it is working, but maybe it's the radical optimist in me, the Black liberation thinker in me, which is to say, we're not dead yet. Are we losing in terms of having material gains that improve the quality of life of ourselves under the system as it stands? Yes. Are we winning in terms of being organized enough to provide each other resources and the mutual aid and the care that we need to survive? The US trying to actively turn itself into an ethno-state? I don't believe we're there, but I believe that the collective knowledge exists and can be tapped into. There are neighborhood gardens. There are mutual aid collectives. There is food, not bombs. There are people throwing rent parties. There are people doing ICE watches and police watches. And if it isn't happening in your local community, this is the time to begin the first steps to get there, to build the community so people can collectively react to the systems that are doing harm against us and others. And I don't say this to mean like I'm perfect, I'm doing it exactly the right way in my life. With each chapter of my life, I'm discovering different modes of organizing, different ways that I want to tap in. I'm in a mode of life right now where media work, committing to revolutionary ideas and showing up and doing the dishes and being a part of spaces. Does that look like me necessarily wanting to be a leader of a movement? I don't see myself ever giving up the fight. And I mention this because I am here at Socialism, and yesterday I got to meet a former Black Panther Party member and revolutionary Ashanti Alston, and it was really inspiring. But he is around 70, 71, and I won't mention too much of the conversation because, of course, this is into like intrapersonal stuff. But what I found really inspiring was that he said, for him, what is really important is to continue to engage, to remain curious, to be open to new solutions, to new ideas. I think the left loses when we stop practicing and defending our political imagination. When we go back to the same playing book again and again and again, we don't innovate or shift some of our strategy. We don't use a diversity of tactics. Caring for yourself, being a human being, having dignity in this world, loving your family, loving your people, loving your community, that takes time. It takes effort. It takes a justifiable rage against systems that are doing harm. Whether or not Kamala won, whether or not she lost, there's still going to be a fight to make sure that justice happens, to make sure that liberation is possible, to make sure that the American project is called out and confronted in the way that it should be, the way that it should have been confronted since 1492. To say that Kamala is a loss, that it didn't create the conditions we needed to have more revolutionary processes, or labor would be in a better place, we can intrinsically say some of those things would be plausible. But there still would be the argument against liberalism, a liberal imperialism that wants to speak nicely, use the nice words. What does it mean to lose? For me, losing is I give up. I don't believe that things will change. I think we've tried everything. That isn't the case yet. This isn't the case at all. Yeah, all I'll say is as long as I'm here, I'm alive. I have breath in my body. I have the capacity to think, to move. And lastly, is the idea people say, but come on, Trump is fucked up and this is bad. Don't you feel bad for not voting? How easy is it to be doxxed when you register to vote? I think there are conditions that can change. I think there are systems and other things that can be put in place. Why vote in a system that created voting because they don't believe the masses are even smart enough to be politicized? Another common thing that I hear is, but come on, Trump is fucked up and this is bad. Don't you feel bad for not voting? Our system is literally underpinned by cynicism or distrust of the masses. And that to me doesn't make any sense. It doesn't create any kind of conditions for us to be critically thinking, to be exercising our autonomy, to have fangs or people power. The ravages of imperialism. It's either a more overt imperialism or a more liberal one that wants a black lady to drop the drones or be the face of the government dropping the drones, as opposed to the reality is that Trump has always been here, or that this system is created for individuals like Trump. How else could he get into office? How else could he win twice? Money's how he won. Money's how he won. And to end, I think now is the time to buckle up, to talk to our neighbors, to talk to our friends, to find systems of care, systems of rapid response, of community defense, of community documentation of the things happening, building the systems to confront and try to hold politicians accountable on a local level for allowing certain things to pass or happen in our communities. I think people need to be much more vocal about the role that ICE and carcerality and police will continue to play. I think we have to buckle up and be ready to face the real America in its most honest and brutal and vicious form. And the more honest America is, the more honest we have to be about the fact that we don't deserve to just survive America, as I always say. We deserve to overcome it. We deserve to overcome it. The reality of American fascism, of imperialism, is why we have to take care of each other. Turn away the reality of American fascism, of imperialism, authoritarianism, is why we have to take care of each other. It's why we have to resist. It's why we can say, yeah, we're losing on these counts, but I'm not losing until I'm gone. Like, yeah, there are momentary losses, there's certain material losses, but the spirit and the belief that we have the right to resist, that is endlessly worth defending and endlessly worth asserting, because when we lose that, that is when we lose. So I wanted to film a different end section to this video because I filmed something already, but it felt better to ground it a bit differently. I've talked about George Jackson a lot on this channel. I've talked about reading Blood in My Eye, and there's a section of this book called After the Revolution Has Failed, and I was just reading a bit of it earlier. And for folks that haven't read it, I'd highly recommend that you read it. I'll put a PDF of Blood in My Eye in the description. I love being able to read about how folks from the past contextualize their losses, or the way that changes or reform or different kinds of tactics defanged the movement or bolstered it. I'll just read a few different sections from here. After the revolution has failed, all questions must center on how a new revolutionary consciousness can be mobilized around the new set of class antagonisms that have been created by the authoritarian reign of terror. At which level of social, political, and economic life should we begin our new attack? First, we, the black partisans and their vanguard party, the old and new left alike, must concede that the workers' revolution and its vanguard parties have failed to deliver the promised changes in property relations or any of the institutions that support them. This must be conceded without bitterness, name-calling, or intense rancor that is presently building. There have been 2 depressions, 2 great wars, a dozen serious recessions, a dozen brush fires, crisis after economic crisis. The mass psycho-social national cohesiveness has trembled on the brink of disruption and disintegration repeatedly over the last 50 years, threatening to fly apart from its own concentric inner dynamics. But at each crisis, it was allowed to reform itself. With each reform, revolution became more remote. This is because the old left has failed to understand the true nature of fascism. We will never have a complete definition of fascism. It is in constant motion, showing a new face to fit any particular set of problems that arise to threaten the predominance of traditionalist capitalist ruling class. And further down, he writes, each economic reform that perpetuates ruling class hegemony has to be disguised as a positive gain for the upthrusting masses. So there's so much in here that's so useful, but I read that and I'm looking at my life in the past 50 years, I'm like, is he talking about then or today? The reason I think it's so good to ground ourselves in, like, are we losing? Why are we acting if we've lost? What is the potential or possibility of right now? And really what George Jackson is digging into is, like, There are going to be layers of repression, layers of fascism, layers of time where we will lose the battle, but the war has not ended yet. The war is not over yet. And it's how seriously we take our future. It's how seriously we take community. And it's also about that individual commitment. Maybe the left is losing, but I don't think that is a justifiable place to settle down and be like, all right, bet, let me just let it wash over me. And I don't think that's necessarily what people are arguing when we're asking if the left is losing, but I think there is a part of us that has to tap into a justifiable rage, or to understand that it's all a continuum. The suffering and violence and misery that the state is producing now, it's not to mean that what is happening now is for nothing, but there's going to be another battle down the line. And kind of the point of it all is to continue fighting. Like, I keep thinking about the older revolutionary folks I've had the chance of interviewing, and even over this past weekend at the Socialism Conference, I'll mention again, Ashanti Alston kept saying it's important to stay curious, it's important to continue thinking of solutions, to talk to people, to be in community with people. Even if I think about my life pursuing revolutionary politics over the last 10 years, I graduated college after a year and a half of intense student organizing. I felt so wrapped up in the movement in the moment. And I remember my senior year, I ran for student government president because I wanted to see if I could win and push politics on my campus. And I remember I lost. I realized, oh, now that I've lost, I won't be attending school another year. I graduate in 2 weeks. I have to go out into the real world. I have to find a job. I have to engage in this fucked up capitalist world. And I remember being so overwhelmed and kind of thinking, what kind of world am I being brought into? And I look at each wave of organizing or getting into community and the community falling apart. I both think community is worth pursuing, and I don't think all community lasts. And so whatever version of fighting for a better world we're imagining right now or experiencing right now, it's always in flux. And this can be a point of sadness, it can be a point of confusion, a point of despair, and it can also be a really beautiful point of opportunity to realize I get to spend the rest of my life working towards liberation, towards revolutionary praxis, towards believing that what we're doing is worth it. And we haven't lost until we're dead. We haven't lost until we're dead. So, and even the dead, the martyred, as so many Palestinians say and believe, this is a part of a collective struggle. And I think the cultures where you can see and sense and feel that the most, there is this idea it's not over till it's over. It's not over till it's over. So I really just wanted to ground people in understanding, even in my life, yes, I could look back and be like, oh, I was in that community and things fell apart, or that chapter of uprising didn't happen or work out in the ways that things did. But each of those chapters, I learned something, and what I learned informed how I moved forward. And some part of, I guess, of what I'm saying about the winning or losing thing is that it almost doesn't matter if we're winning right now, as long as we're fighting for a better collective future for us, for our friends, for our family, and for future generations. Because I really do believe winning, losing, I believe in a strategy that goes beyond my lifetime, both based on the constraints of my lifetime and all the things that I make possible and search for and do, and also the unforeseen things that my belief systems, my hope, can eventually lead to. Because I do think the other side, the conservatives, the Nazis, the bigots, want us to feel despair. They want us to feel like we've lost. But I keep thinking, I'm still here. And unless I become a normie, I haven't lost, so I'm not gonna become a normie. So yeah, I hope this video helps. I really just wanted to do this as a way to ground us, and hopefully this is something you can share with folks and be a conversation starter, or even disagree with each other and figure out the importance in the ways that you disagree. But I do believe that now is a time for caring for each other, for understanding the scope and scale of all the things that will inevitably continue to be funded and aid in our subjugation or the subjugation of other people. And also, repression pisses people off, and people come together and people fight. So figure out how you can fight in your local community, figure out how you can be near each other, communicate with each other, learn from each other, and keep experimenting. If you do that, the left hasn't lost yet. Thank you for watching another video on my channel. I have a bunch of other videos in the works. We have a vlog about my time at the Socialism Conference that I'll be sharing soon. I'm nearing the end of my Security Culture Part 2 video for the Direct Action 101 series. And there's a couple other things that I'm working on. I definitely am working on more direct action video ideas, and there's definitely a bunch of stuff with the Dugout that's coming out. I believe when this video comes out on my channel, also this week, Dugout will be releasing an interview with Fawaz, who's a Sudanese anarchist organizer, and we got to talk to Fawaz for about 2 or so hours. The interview is in English and Arabic, and it's really just another kind of piece of media that I've had the chance to tap in on that just feels so much like a pillar of the kind of body of work I want to continue building. And for me, continuing this fight looks like a lot of different things. It looks like being in a community with people. It looks like continuing to make media. It looks like continuing to make art. It looks like continuing to do the organizing I do outside of the video media space. Continue your work. Figure out how you can tap in. Thank you for watching. Consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. Find me on Patreon. Find me on Meets TV. See you later.
After part 1, this video felt necessary as well because, yes, there are modes of behavior that help us understand security culture. There are sort of phrases and ways of communicating and group and individual culture that helps. But the other part is legitimately knowing the different tools of surveillance and the different ways that the state tries to survey and entrap people. Some of this is about the logic of policing. Some of this is about the industry and infrastructure of policing, all of the money that goes into carcerality and surveillance. It's a massive industry in the US and globally, especially now as there's rising fascism. Because, I mean, look at the